Hi, in today's session we are going to cover associations. Associations within urban EABP are the relationships that an object has to other objects. An object can be associated or linked to other objects in order to show multiple things, such as ownership, responsibility, usage, or other relationships which you can define. The associations themselves are also objects, so there's an intersection object, which is the association, and you can capture information about it. And you can also create and report on the associations in a variety of different ways. There are some out-of-the-box associations that exist, and these are what we commonly refer to as POLDAT. So POLDAT stands for Process, Organization, Location, Data, Application, and Technology. You can see these are the elements right here on the left. And all of these can be related to one another. So a process can be associated to an application, to an organization, location. Data can be associated to a process or to any of these other elements. The intersection objects for all of these objects are these following three. So we have reason for involvement, data usage, and entity synonym. Reason for involvement is the association from a process to everything except for data. Data usage is the association between data and process, while entity synonym is the association from data to everything other than process. So those are the three associations. You don't really need to know each one by name, but if you ever go in and you modify the association, or if you go to a CRUD matrix and you see, for instance, data usage, you'll know that's the relationship between data and process. Versus reason for involvement is something you'll see all the time, for instance, when you're looking at the swim lane association of a process to an organization. So that's something you will see there. There are multiple ways to create associations. For instance, when we created those swim lane diagrams in a previous module, when you drag a process into a swim lane, that creates an association for you. You can also use what are called association connectors. You can do it manually, so by doing a right click on an object, you can go into its associations dialog and set it up, and via what we call multi-select, which I'll show you in just a bit. There are also other CW Suite components where you can do that as well. So you have Object Explorer, Model Explorer, Auto Modeler, and Matrix, and those are other places where associations can be created. One of the things that's important to realize about nested associations is when you put a process or any object into a swim lane, which is something bigger than itself, the association will get created, but it's important to realize that when you move something out of a swim lane, the association will not get removed. So you need to click on that button to update associations. When you're on a diagram that is showing you nested associations, if you were to take a task and drag it in, one thing I want you to notice is when you're dragging it in, when it's outside of the swim lane, you're simply getting a plus next to the cursor. And as soon as you drag it inside the swim lane, the cursor changes into a three-pointed plus sign. So when you drag it inside, it's actually adding the association. So that's a symbol for associations within the CW Suite. So as soon as you drag an object into a swim lane, it's creating an association. So if we give this a name, for instance, if I call this edit order, this object now has been created, and I can actually look under my associations window. So you can go ahead and turn on your associations from the window menu. Once you turn it on, you can have it available. So if it's gone away, if you did something else in the modeler and you've closed it, you can always reopen it. Or if you didn't need it, you could have closed it. So now here we have edit order, and you can actually see that it's associated to France sales because that's the swim lane that it's currently in. So it's in the France sales swim lane. And now when we move it out of the swim lane, as you can see, it's still associated to France sales. But what I would want to do is go to the Tools menu and click on Update Associations. What that will do is it will remove this association for me between a process and organization, and perhaps create another one that was missing, perhaps for this review process that's sitting here on its own. So now when we click on Edit Order, that's no longer associated to any organization, and review process most likely is associated to accounting. That's correct. And now we can do the same thing, move that out if we didn't want that there, and update associations. That should delete an association for us. So whenever you have objects in the swim lane, and maybe they were added at a later date, or you didn't verify the associations, you can click on this very helpful update associations button, and that will refresh the association for you. And again, we can hit continue. That will remove the association from review order to accounting. So the associations are additive, they're not subtractive. So if you're adding something to a swim lane, it will be added. If you're moving it out of that swim lane, we don't automatically remove the association for you until you click on the Update Associations button, which lives on the Tools menu. So that is something to remember no matter what kind of diagram you're working with that has nested associations. One of the ways of associating objects is via association connectors. So that brings me to the next point that I wanted to share with you, is that there are different types of connectors. Sometimes they are simply lines, and if they're lines, they're just called connectors. And sometimes they are associations. There are also hierarchy links and special things called relationships on ERD, or entity relationship diagrams. When we're using a diagram like a process flow, or any diagram that uses something other than just a straight line, we can actually bend the lines. We can bend the lines using some of the diagram behavior that's on the diagram tab of the options dialog. To get to the options dialog, simply click on the home menu. And from the home menu, there's the options right here on the right. I'll highlight that. From options, you can actually click on this little expander button, and then you'll find that you have the user tab and the diagram tab. On the diagram tab, we can choose how the lines are behaving, whether they're bent or straight. And if you choose straight lines, most of the options are grayed out. So as soon as you choose bent, you're actually able to do things like automatic routing, maintaining right angles, and showing line arches. So I will show you a couple of these right now. If I turn on automatic routing, that also turns on maintaining right angles. And what that means is if I take an object, and let's say take this check customer credit, as I move it around the diagram, it actually keeps redrawing the lines. And it also keeps the lines in a specific place. One of the other options for my lines is the ability to have docking points. Docking points set the spot where the line begins. So if I click on an object, you can't see the dots, but as soon as I click on a connector, you'll be able to see these little red dots appear. They're very useful for things like IDEF notation or other notations where the placement of the line is really important. So this gives you 3 spots where a line can initiate from or can enter the object from. So if you imagine IDEF has inputs and outputs from the left and outputs on the right, and then inputs from the top and the bottom, and this would be really helpful for that kind of notation. And then you can just drag the lines around. If you hit F11 on your keyboard, if you go to draw, redraw line, that will redraw the line for you. We have automatic routing turned on, so the lines will keep going. But now, since we enabled the docking points, the lines will always start or end from the spots that we chose. Another thing that you can do with these kind of lines is to create additional joints. I'm zooming in a little so we can see this a little bit better, but joints are things that allow us to move a line. So by default, each line like this that has a 90-degree bend has a joint right here and a joint right here. I want to make sure you can see that, so I will highlight the spot. The joint is here and here. Now what we can do is we can actually add additional joints by choosing a line and holding down Control, and you can see what I'm doing right now is I'm adding additional joints, and that allows me to move a line in a different way. When we have 90-degree bends turned on automatically and maintaining right angles, we can't actually take advantage of the joints. So if I turn that off, I can now create these joints and then move a section of the line. Of course, that undoes the 90-degree bend, which is why I can't use my joints with that option selected. And now I can actually make things go around whichever way I want. Most of the time, you can go in and redraw your lines by using these buttons right here. So let's highlight where that spot is right here. There's a section for your connectors. In fact, this whole section right here allows you to choose your most commonly used connector options, such as maintaining right angles and showing line arches. Line arches are helpful if you have lines that cross each other. So if you're ever in a situation where, for instance, you have an object, if you had an object in between here and a line crossed, you would be able to show that. Here, if we kind of drag this line over here, you can actually see right there. Here are my line arches. So the little line arches right there. And again, I have automatic routing turned on, so as soon as I do that, it will redraw my lines for me into the most logical spot. When adding connectors, you can either draw them by choosing the spot from an object into the next object. So let's say you wanted to connect these two together. This will let you choose mandatory or optional. And that's really helpful, so you can choose whichever connectors are available from the palette. And these are smart connectors. So if a certain line isn't available from the palette, if it doesn't belong to two of the objects, you won't be able to add it. So here I'm able to add it. Again, I can use my F11 shortcut to redraw it. I'm going to delete that connector, and I'm going to show you another way to add it. One of the other things you can do is set a connector as a default. And if you have access to the palette, you can choose which one is the default. Most likely, your palette will be already defined to have a default. So in this case, I'm setting the mandatory one as default. That allows me to hit F12 on my keyboard and go to my target. And that was a quick way to add a bunch of connectors. So the way that works is you go from your source, then hit F12 and go to the target. And you can also always do undo. So there's an undo available until you delete something on the diagram. As you can see, I can keep undoing until I delete something. If I were to delete something from the database, so if you watch this undo button here at the top left, again, I will highlight, I'll just point my pen to it. You can see this undo here at the top left corner. And so now I can actually take this edit order. I'm going to delete it. And if you delete something, it removes it from your model. As soon as I do that, you can see my undo has grayed out. Hopefully everyone can see that. I now can no longer undo anything. So if I try to undo it, I can't. As soon as I delete something from the diagram, my undo list is cleared. So that's just another thing to remember. Deleting is different than clearing. If I clear this review process, if I clear it, I can go and look at my existing objects and can look at my tasks, look for review, and there's my review process. However, if I delete that, I won't be able to retrieve it. So if I hit delete and hit OK, my review process is gone from the repository. I also want to mention the fact that connectors also have properties about them, just like other objects on a diagram. So if you double click on the connector line, you can see that it has properties. In this case, the line coming out of the XOR can have a name. So you can specify when you validate sales orders and when you call the customer, which one and why. You can give it a category, which will define what it looks like, a delay, so if it's a certain delay of time, and a percent split. So these are all different things you can do. So if you were to give it a name for every new order, maybe we need to validate the sales order or for every order over a certain amount. So you can put that right in the name of the connector, and that is your path. Connectors can also exist as association connectors, which allows you to create a relationship between two objects. So we started talking about associations in this module, and associations can be created by dragging an object into a swim lane or also by dragging a special association connector between any two objects. So you can see right here, this application flow sends line is actually the association between ITSM and CI list and service interruption time per CI, etc. So these are kind of application flow where it sends, and then the other one, the application flow is received by the application. So in this case, the interpretation is where it's going from the application to the flow or vice versa. So if we look at it in the actual diagram, when you look at the association connector, when you select on the diagram, you can see on the palette or on this properties dialog that it says this is an association flow to application. We can see the source and the target. So the source is ITSM and the target is CI list. You can actually look at the properties of the association itself. You can see right here it's the association flow application send. You can have a name for the association. You can also give it a category and then give it a description. Since the association is an object, you can also have the meta model defined to add more information. We'll talk about that in a later topic, but keep in mind that it is an object just like another object in the meta model. So if we were to take, for instance, a brand new object here, so I'll take a brand new flow. I'll just call this my new flow. I can start for my application object, grab one of these little arrows. So I'll zoom in on this for a sec so you can see. This is a little triangle that comes out of the application. And that little triangle, it represents the association. I'll zoom out a little bit. F6 lets us zoom in on a specific object. I can grab this little pointer. And you can see at first, it's just a circle with a line going through it, meaning I can't just leave it here. I have to connect it to something. So I'm going to connect it to a new flow. And it allows me to choose, do you want this to be the application flow sends or receives? And I'll do send. Sends makes the arrowhead go to the right. The receives would go the other way. And now, of course, if I were to look at ITSM and all of its associations, I will be able to see that it has an association to my new flow. So I can see here on the right, the new flow is right here. So it's an association right here to new flow. The model is refreshing that. That is done automatically by dragging the line between those two objects, by dragging the association line. And it's a really important distinction to make, that it's not just any old line that will do that, but it will be done by an association line. Another way to create associations is manually. In order to manually create an association, you simply click on the properties of the object. So in this case, it's a process, and then the associations button. Every object has an associations button that will take you to the associations that have been created in the meta model. So if you're not doing an association via a swim lane or an association connector, this is the other basic way to do it through CW Modeler. So when you're on a diagram, and this is how you can do it. You would choose the object you wish to associate to, and then you'll be prompted with a dialog that shows you what's currently associated. So this is showing us the associated organizations for the create service request process. And then you can either create a brand new organization to associate to that process or choose an existing one. And if you choose an existing one, you will be prompted with a dialog that shows us those existing organizations. On this dialog, you can see the existing organizations listed at the bottom, and you can choose the ones that are appropriate for this process. You can filter in here. You can decide, different ways to find it. And once you find the organizations you need, simply check off the boxes, and you'll see that they are associated because they will show up in this dialog. So this will show you the associations that now have been made, and later on, of course, you can edit the associated object. You can edit the link via these buttons here. So you can edit the associated object or edit the association itself. Another way to create associations in CW Modeler is via the multi-select. The multi-select allows you to create an association when there is no association line on the palette, or if you can't drag one object into the other, if that's also not set up. So if the nested association is not set up and the association line is not present, you can always shift select both objects, click on associate objects, and then choose the association you wish to add. Once you hit OK, that will be shown in the associations window as an existing association. In this case, we associated the corporate modeler application to the prepare quote task, and they are now associated via that dialog. And one really helpful feature for being able to do impact analysis is the ability to insert missing either associations or the associated objects. So that is something that will help you leverage the relationships that you've created in your model, and it will draw these impact diagrams for you automatically. So if you were to choose an object, in this case, sales representative, you can add all of its associations, and that's based on the palette. In the EA Foundation model, there is an actual impact analysis diagram template, and you can use that in order to add objects to the diagram to show you your existing associations. In order to take advantage of the impact analysis option, we can look at diagrams from the impact analysis button on the EA Foundation homepage. So I will click on impact analysis, and this will take me to a diagram where you can actually see there are quite a few different options here for impact analysis in the middle of the screen. So there's one for role, one for task, for service, etc. So if you choose the one for role, it will take you to this diagram, which looks just like what we had in the slide. But one of the things you can do is you can actually clear all of these things out. So you can right click and clear and recreate that association. So this is something that's really helpful. We create the associated objects being on the diagram. Now the palette is important to note. You can see the objects that are currently on the palette. And if you scroll down, you can also see the associations. So this will determine what kind of things can be added onto the diagram based on what's present on the palette. So the palette determines what can be added from the repository onto the diagram. It acts as a filter that was done in order to create a specific type of diagram. So now when I click on sales representative from the action menu, one of the things that I can choose under insert missing are either associations or associated objects. So what that means for me is that if there's an association that exists from sales representative, and I already have the objects on the diagram, so if I had a bunch of processes or applications or whatever on here, the associations option will add for me just the lines. So if I just do insert missing associations, this option will add the lines. However, if I don't have the objects on the diagram yet, if I do insert missing associated objects, that will also add the lines for me along with the objects. So I will show you how that works. I will choose sales representative, click on associated objects from the insert missing section of the action menu, and then we wait. And we wait because what it's doing is it's actually checking the repository. It may give you this kind of dialog that says one or more objects have not been added because the association type is not in your palette. And that is exactly what I was saying, that the palette serves as a way to filter out things you may not want. Now I've hit F4 to center this to my screen, so now I can actually organize these objects by type of thing, and I can't see their names at this point, but I can see the gray ones will go there. Those are processes. Maybe I want the blue ones to go at the top, and we'll check it in a second. We're drawing this on the fly, and this can also be done really nicely with Auto Modeler. And then the yellow ones we'll put on the left. So we'll take a peek at this in just a moment. So we're creating this on the fly. If you click on the object, you can right click and go to draw and then redraw your lines. I will redraw all the lines for you. Zoom in, choose the object to center to your screen, or can use F11 to redraw the lines for those of you who remember that shortcut. And now what this shows me are the activities as well as the tasks that are all related to sales representative. And of course, if we wanted to line these up a little bit nicer, we can go to the format menu, and under the format menu, we can align the center and click one of these so they will all be aligned to each other's centers. And you can do the same thing on the right. So once again, format, align to the vertical center and choose one of them. And so that has created the associated objects with the lines on the diagram for me. And just to summarize, the ways that we can create associations are through swim lanes, through association connectors, and also via the manual way of creating associations. So in fact, if I go to my sales representative, I'll show you one last thing in this module. So if I go to sales representative and I go to associations, and for instance, if I go to associated organizations, I can see currently I have France sales, UK sales, and US sales, and those are all the three that you see on the diagram. If we click on new link and find another one, such as accounting, and create an association to accounting, we don't need to give it a name or anything, but just allow the association to persist. Now we can, of course, use the same feature to insert missing associated objects, and now it will go out and grab accounting for us. You can see it just added accounting, showing us there's an association from sales representative to accounting. Thank you so much for your attention.